Hey guys, what's up? This is Stock Retail coming back to you on Saturday afternoon here on the West Coast, probably early Saturday evening on the East Coast, and all other kind of time zones all over the world. Always love saying that because to me it is a great reminder of how apes, we are a movement all around the world. We're worldwide. We have banded together to make something different in the world. And so I'm glad we're here. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad to be here with you. Obviously, a lot going on, a lot of discussion around the shareholder vote coming. I had just tweeted something this morning, kind of said, hey, there's this idea in some lines of management thinking, which is go slow to go fast. And so the first thing I just want to say before I get into any detail today is we're not in a hurry here. Um, we have time. It's not even, the date is not even on us yet when our shares will be counted to see how many votes we each even have. Like, we're not even there yet, much less to the vote itself. So we have time. We're going to digest all of this. We're going to cover it. One of the things I've seen in the past that I've seen this in all walks of life. When someone pushes you to make a quick decision, that's the tactics of like high pressure sales or bullying behavior, those kinds of things. Nobody's doing that to us here. But what I'm just saying to you is if you start seeing things all over the internet of, decide no or yes now on all these different things, those are probably voices you might be able to just sort of say, okay, hang on. I'm going to calm myself down. I'm going to slow down. Honestly, there's even psychology behind you think better if you can slow your heart rate, calm your mind, take a minute, whether that's go for a walk, meditate, pray, whatever the things are for you, do a hobby. So that's where I'm at right now. Just that's a little bit of kind of preamble to, okay, I'm going to start looking at this information, but I'm not going to allow anybody to rush me. I'm going to digest it, I'm going to think about it, and I'm going to be thoughtful and take it seriously as a shareholder and as a voter. So that's just kind of where I want to start. But today, what I want to even do is ground us in conceptual understanding. Like, it's kind of hard to place a vote if you don't even really understand how things work, right? And I'm just going to assume with 3.8 million shareholders, we don't all have the same level of understanding of why does a board even exist? What does the board do? What are their roles and responsibilities versus, say, Adams as the CEO? I'm going to talk a little bit even about some employee compensation as well, executive compensation. So today's video is going to be like a part one. We're going to kind of lay the groundwork so that we understand the context in which we're even voting. And that then should help inform us to better understand whether each of us, you, me, anybody else, feels like being a yes or no on any of these items. I think that's a whole lot better than me just jumping on here and telling you what to vote. I'd rather educate you, let you come to your own informed opinions. I will at some point come to my opinions about what I'm voting. I will share that. That's not going to be today. This part one, like I said, is going to lay the groundwork for better understanding. But I also encourage you to not necessarily feel like you have to vote with me. Like, I'm going to tell you why I vote a certain way by the time I get there. And I encourage you to, understand why you're going to vote a certain way. So first off, if you haven't seen, if you go to AMC's website, you can get to governance information. So I'm going to talk a lot about governance today. Think of governance like, have you ever gone bowling? I have 3 kids. One of them still a little younger than the other 2. And when we take them bowling, some of the family has to use bumpers and some do not. So those bumpers keep you in the lane and help you score points, right? Or think of it as guardrails on a road. I've told you before, I live in Oregon. If you go over to the Oregon coast, it's beautiful. It's gorgeous. There's some spots where you drive, like say you drive from here to California, you end up at some cliffs, and it's really beautiful, but you got to take it seriously too. And so then there's these guardrails, right, that keep you on the road. They keep you from going off a cliff. So think about corporate governance as the guardrails or the bumpers that keep us in line. They set out standards and guidelines that executives and the board itself has to live by. Some of that is sort of dictated by corporate law, and then some of it is flexible that a given corporation can decide. So there's a couple things I want to tell you about that almost any legal entity operates. And actually, real quick, before I say that too, reminder, whether you're new here, maybe you haven't heard, or some of you might have missed before, I actually served on a board for about 5 years. Now, that was a nonprofit, so that was not a for-profit business. But there are things I learned in terms of how a board works, how the board operates with its employees. We effectively had a CEO. There are things. I actually was part of a subcommittee that even redid our bylaws and our articles of incorporation. So these are documents you're seeing here on the screen, and I'm just giving you, I guess, the background that I I suppose I won't claim that I'm an expert. I haven't served on a board, for a company the size of AMC, but I have some knowledge and experience of how boards operate. So that's why I'm now telling you a little bit about this. All right. So first off, let's look at the top right here. So you see, I'm showing you. You could go to AMC Investor Relations. You can get to governance and look at these three sub little links. So you can get to the officers and the board of directors. I'm going to show you those in a minute. You can get to what different committees the board has. So if you've got, say, 8 or 9 people on the board, they might divide and conquer different work. And we did that on our board. And I told you once, a board, generally you want people of diverse skill sets. So maybe there's a compensation board and you put people on that who kind of know what they're doing in that space. Maybe there's another board that's around like strategy and vision and they're partnering with the CEO on that. And so you want people who are good in that space. There's just different areas of skills and background. All right, so and then you see the governance documents, and I'm going to show you kind of a screenshot of those, but again, you don't need to even get any of this from me. You can go straight to the website, go get it for yourself. So just a couple things I want to highlight for you that in general, there's kind of two sets of documents, and I'm going to show you in a minute again, but there's two sets of documents that basically determine how a company is going to work. And they can go by different names. I noticed on AMC's website, there's some other titles of some documents here, but I'll show you those. So basically, there's an Articles of Incorporation. If you remember when we were doing some of the previous votes, I went and found some things that, for example, like all the way back in 2013 was where AMC's board of directors and the CEO had the right to issue these preferred equity shares. So I knew, like, okay, those guardrails were out there all the way in 2013. This wasn't some new, you guys heard about Project Popcorn and all this other random stuff people are trying to, I don't know, get you confused by. So that's how I knew. I could go back to the documents. I could see, hey, this has been in existence for a decade before apes ever came around, kind of. So articles of incorporation kind of are part of the governance of a company, and then the bylaws govern kind of the board of directors and the company itself as well. So you want to understand those things. First off, so that website I said, if you were to click, you can go see, okay, who's on the board? You can go learn more about all these people. We got the internet these days. There they are. Okay, so then you can also see the documents. I mentioned that a minute ago. So I've just underlined a few that I think would be the most relevant, but that's my opinion, and there's the whole list. You can go look at all of these. So first of all, look at the bottom here, this Code of Business Conduct and Ethics. Perhaps that code of compliance underneath that I didn't highlight, you might want to see. You can see in 2021, there was kind of a revision to a corporate governance guidelines and principles. And then look at 2022, this AMC bylaws and amendments. So that's, I was telling you about bylaws and all of that. And then you've got the compensation committee. So that's just their charter. It's like, what's their purpose? A charter just says a committee's kind of purpose and sort of authority it sets out. By the way, that's the reason all these governance documents matter. They determine what authority different groups have and also put boundaries, or those guardrails, those bumpers, put these boundaries on the stop to your authority. So for example, Adam doesn't have authority to do anything and everything he wants. There are guardrails, there's stops. So that's what these things do, is they say you can go here and no further, that kind of thing, and you get to operate within this. It actually helps a company be really effective, because within boundaries, if someone has complete freedom and they know, all right, I know where my boundaries are, and now I can kind of bring forth all of my creativity inside those bounds. So that's one of the reasons, like I said, I was on a governance committee and helped determine that for our group. And what it really was doing was freeing our leader, our sort of CEO, to then know exactly what authority they did and did not have, and then when they needed to come to the board for things versus when we were hands off and allow them to run. So it can be really healthy to just have clearly defined roles and responsibilities and authority and all of that. That's why all of this matters. And then for us as shareholders, there's a lot of law around it to protect us as well. And then you've got the insider trading policy. I think that might be kind of just interesting for you. So you can also see then all of the officers. That matters too, because as we're voting, you're going to see that term officers. Generally, that's going to mean really kind of more senior executives. So if you look through this list, you see senior VP, executive VP, and on and on and on. So these are all pretty much, here's a president of Europe, I see. Otherwise, generally, these are all VPs. That's going to matter because the things that we're voting on, I noticed that language of officer. So it's not all just about Adam. It's going to be this group of people. So again, go back. Let me just go back here. Senior officers and board of directors, right? So you can click that. This is where I took this. As I always say, no trust me bros here. The source, I got this from AMC Investor Relations, and you can go get it too. So as we vote, and this actually, by the way, confirms something I was telling you on a recent video in terms of, I don't know, backseat drivers and armchair quarterbacks and all of us, myself included sometimes. I've got to look at myself in the mirror here, kind of questioning leadership decisions and thinking I wouldn't do that or I might do this better. And I mentioned how broad of a group Adam is managing. So just look at some of these. So here's like human resources, general counsel, that's law, that's lawyers. Chief operations, that's like a COO pretty much. Worldwide programming and chief content officer, chief financial officer, chief marketing officer, accounting. I had talked about corporate controlling and accounting, content strategy, blah, blah, blah. So you just see all the different corporate functions. These all roll up under Adam. All of these people, somewhere through the organization, you'd have an org chart. They report up ultimately through him, and then he reports to the board. So let's talk about, speaking of reporting to the board, some high-level roles and responsibilities. This is just kind of, I've also told you guys I come from the corporate world. I worked for 21 years at a Dow Jones company, a company that I really enjoyed working for. It was a good company. It's still corporate life, and there's plenty that sucks about corporate life. Sorry for those of you who are, well, actually, I still work for a corporation, so I think it's okay to say, but there's some really great things, too, when you work for a good company. Sometimes you take the good with the bad, but I digress. The reason I bring that up, though, is just this is the way corporations look at it. You think about roles and responsibilities. You'll think about things called a RACI, which kind of shows who's responsible, accountable, who's informed versus consulted, all these kinds of things. So companies generally operate when everybody understands their roles and has the space to be creative within that. There's kind of a balance of that. So here's how a corporation would look at it. So your board, you need to know this piece first. Actually, the board is who manages, hires, and fires the CEO. That's not us as shareholders. That's the board. I've heard some rumbling, I don't know, maybe a month or two ago, people even talking about voting on a CEO and stuff. That's not how that works. We vote on the board. The board manages, hires, and fires the CEO. It's a way for us as shareholders to have a group that the CEO is accountable to, so the CEO can't become a dictator and just do whatever they want. It's a healthy balance of powers, basically. The board keeps the CEO in line, the CEO runs the company. And then again, all these governance documents keep both the board and the CEO in line. That's the theory. Obviously, we've seen some corporations go sideways, in the past, and so I'm giving you how it's supposed to work in general. All right, so the board then also manages the compensation of all these top officers, at least sets compensation policy, let's say, and then that policy, again, allows certain decision authority underneath it. And then the board owns all governance policies, in effect. There's a role called the chairman of the board that you've heard of. Right now, Adam actually is the chairman. The chairman, one of the main powers they have is, and you can see this bullet here, is basically to set the agenda for board meetings. So if there were things the chairman did not want discussed, they could basically not put it on the agenda. Now, most boards, you're not going to have a dictator role there, but it is a person who's responsible for keeping the board organized, managing the agenda, partnering in some cases with the CEO. A lot of times, those two might be the closest partnership. In our example, I was not the chairman, first of all. Our chairman was a fantastic person who would make sure to have a good relationship with some of the real senior leaders. And by the way, often they'll go beyond the CEO because, I mentioned, look at that first bullet under board, manage the CEO. So part of their job is to look at how is the CEO doing. Well, to do that, sometimes the board will spend time with other executives and get feedback on the CEO. That's very normal too. So this is just a place where the CEO is kind of held accountable and answers to. And that doesn't always have to be adversarial. We had a great relationship with our CEO. We held them accountable, but it was also in a way that encouraged their growth and encouraged the growth of the organization. And I don't just mean, let's say, monetary growth. I'm talking about health. How are the employees doing? How are people doing who interact with our organization? Stuff like that. So the board is holding the CEO accountable to sort of healthy behavior, healthy growth, strategic direction, these kinds of things. And then finally, the CEO themselves, they just run the company. They run the whole company. And I think in a healthy environment, the board tries to sort of be out of the way in many ways. Like I said, you create those clear boundaries for your CEO, but then you don't micromanage the business. You hire someone who knows how to run it, who's an operator, and you get out of their way. And as the board, you're there to just make sure to create an environment where they can succeed, and where all of the employees succeed. I just think that's really important because as we're coming up to votes, as we're thinking about compensation, as we're thinking about roles and governance of the board itself, you need to even know how this all works. Okay? Let's switch a little bit and talk about executive compensation. I've told you guys I was a low-level executive. I was not a VP at that Dow Jones company, but I had a director title. In some companies, they would have really called me like a senior director. It depends on the size of the company. I myself was like at a level I had stock options. I'm going to talk a little bit about stock options today too. And so here's some things I would suggest understanding as you go into the vote. One of the things we're going to vote on is some of the employee compensation. Remember that, well, actually don't remember. That's another topic I'll cover in another video. Here are some things I'm thinking about. One is the board, as they think about compensation, and you'll find there's a committee on compensation, so they're setting that guidance. They need to think about talent acquisition and talent retention. These are kind of like normal phrases you're going to hear in a corporation. So talent acquisition is just, can I hire the right people? Remember when we were, having popcorn was getting, that business line didn't exist and was getting created. What did Adam do? He went out and hired someone from, I think, Pepsi Frito-Lay. I've referenced her a few times, and boy, I've got to go learn her name because I forget it every time I'm filming. And she's a really fantastic executive who has an amazing resume, and I ought to remember her name. She deserves it because she's done a great job too. But anyway, to implement that business, Adam wanted to have someone who could run the business and who could actually go out and get the contracts we needed. I would not be surprised at all if she was part of negotiating the deal with Walmart and brought Walmart in. She probably carried those relationships into the role from her time at Pepsi Frito-Lay. Like, how many companies are bigger in food and beverage than Pepsi Frito-Lay, right? That's one of the biggest out there. And so imagine a world where Adam could not offer her sort of the compensation that would have attracted her to the role. Let's say she's like, okay, that's a really neat opportunity, but you're going to pay me half of what I could make somewhere else. She may not take the role. And now Adam would be stuck having to bring in lesser than talent, unless he can just really sell someone on, a neat job. There are plenty of people, and I tell you from experience, I get calls from recruiters because I have a decent resume in my field. I have a fairly unique set of experiences that not a lot of people have. And so I literally get emails and calls from recruiters, and if the first check is if they don't want to pay me something worth me changing jobs, because that's the other thing, it's a hurdle to decide you want to change jobs, then we kind of stop the conversation right then and there. That's just how it works. And so that's one thing a board has to think about. Are we competitive in the marketplace? And usually within your industry, you're going to have all kinds of salary surveys. You commission outside parties to sort of look at your compensation versus other companies' compensation. HR will spend a lot of time on that and have all kinds of data. This is all very normal stuff. And what will happen is if you're not competitive, then you're not getting the talent you may need to run your business, or you're taking kind of secondary talent. And that can be a problem. And so that's something you need to understand, like as we go in, something I'm going to be thinking about. Do I need to give these guys permission to raise some of the compensation? Because perhaps, if you remember, like in 2023, they froze it. Nobody got any raises at that level this year. Perhaps it's starting to fall out of competitive balance. I don't know yet. Just to be clear, I don't have an opinion yet. I have not read the document. I'm going to take time to get to my opinion. So that's one. So then talent retention is kind of the same. Like I told you, sometimes I'll get those phone calls, I'll get those emails from recruiters. They'll dangle some carrots in front of you. And so it's important for your company to be paying at a level where people aren't just leaving constantly. There's a real cost to employee turnover, and it slows down momentum on all of your projects, and it slows down the sort of efficiency of your company if you're constantly having to bring in new people and losing people who've learned the ropes, so to speak. So that's just important to understand that As you think about compensation, that's one question that the board would have to ask, HR is going to ask, and I think we as shareholders are now going to have to ask because we're voting. How do we feel about talent attraction and talent retention? Is AMC at a level where executives would look at them and say, I want to be part of that? Let's say we're implementing this wine business, or say down the road there's other big opportunities. What if we need someone who's going to partner with all the other sort of celebrities like Taylor Swift and now run a distribution company? Do we have that talent already in, and could you hire them, or are they going to say, sorry, you can't pay me what I'm worth? These are kind of things you're just going to have to think about. And unfortunately, guys, part of what we're dealing with, all people equal, right? The ape movement, is we do feel like there is some inequity in the world that we're fighting against. And unfortunately here, that we're going to be talking about people who make a lot more money than you or I, and we're talking about them getting raises, and that starts to sound really weird, right? Maybe it doesn't sit right for some of you. I'm just telling you the way the world works. I'm not telling you how you need to feel about it. But the way the world works is if you don't pay competitive salaries and bonuses and all that, you lose out on competition for talent. So just think about that as we vote. All right, next thing. So performance management. The board, in terms of compensation, I mentioned they hold the CEO accountable. So for all of these top level executives, they're sort of thinking through, does our compensation motivate and hold accountable our officers to deliver what's called shareholder value, or in some cases you may talk about stakeholder value. And what that means is, we've talked about stock options before, and I'm going to click in a little bit on that in just a minute too. If your directors, your senior level executives, let's say, are getting stock options no matter how the company does. Company could tank, we're still going to pay you all kinds of money. That's not real motivating, right? So there are cash bonuses, stock bonuses, things like that are contingent. They're full of incentives that say, all right, you have to reach certain goals. We set these metrics, basically. You have to achieve these metrics, or you don't even get this bonus. So for example, maybe it's a profitability goal. Maybe it's a cash flow goal. Maybe for AMC, it could be like a certain amount of revenue or a certain amount of attendees, gross margin. There's a lot of ways to set business goals. It could even be, things that are more subjective, like customer satisfaction. I don't know, ape sentiment. I'm sort of choking on that one because we've talked a lot about people influencing sentiment out there. That one would be a mess. But I'm just telling you, there's different ways to say you can put strings on these bonuses. So there are strings attached, and you can say, you're only getting this if you basically perform. So it's performance management. It gets someone to be motivated to do a good job rather than just sit at their desk and then wait for the checks to come in. So I just want you to know that's another thought behind compensation that these guys do. And that's going to end up mattering. It's going to end up being relevant as we click deeper and deeper into stock options in the future. That'll be a topic we'll kind of cover. And then finally, so I just kind of covered, there's several areas. I suppose I should have also put like health benefits and things like that on here. There's other things you might see, like education grants. I got money when I was at my company for sort of continuing education. That's how I got my second master's degree. I had some support. And so there's the salary you'll think about. There's these bonuses. There's the stock option grants, and there's all kinds of other compensation. And those recruiters I talked about, they like to try to get you focused on the total package, is what that really means. Let's talk about grants for a minute, stock option grants, because you're going to end up needing to understand these in coming days. I'm only going to just kind of cover this at this high level here that you see on this one page. Don't worry, I'm not going deep yet, but we will click in deeper. In the past, I've even reviewed Adam's shares and shown you exactly how many he has now and how many are coming in the future and all that stuff. So let's just all, as we're trying to understand the board, we're understanding the role of the CEO, we're understanding about compensation packages. Now let's understand a little bit about one specific piece of that compensation, which is stock option grants. So I told you I was at a level where I was getting stock option grants, and I was able to choose between these top two big bullets. This says restricted stock units, and then it says these restricted stock options. At my company, you could choose which ones you wanted or even kind of have a blend. So let's explain these, because you're going to see a lot about RSUs with AMC. And if you've been around a while, if you've been an ape a while, you've seen things about RSUs every year. You're going to see these every year. And I'll explain why on this slide. So first off, let's say, what is a restricted stock unit, these RSUs? It's usually basically it's part of a bonus. So notice this first sub bullet, usually equivalent to a cash bonus. So effectively, um, if you recall, Adam had, gosh, I want to say maybe even 2/3 of his salary basically is in stock options. Don't quote me on that because I don't, for some reason in my mind, I'm not positive I'm right about that, but it was 50% or 2/3, some large portion of his salary, and by extension, some of the other executive salaries, is, or not salary, but their compensation is in these RSUs. So meaning it's basically like a cash bonus. If the company was giving a cash bonus, you wouldn't almost notice the difference. But here's how this works so that you can have a right understanding. First off, it's a number of shares, but the amount of shares, the number, will adjust to meet some cash value. So if you take an RSU, or if you're given an RSU, uh, let's say, for example, in a given year, just to use a easy number, you were going to get $10,000 of a bonus. Obviously, theirs is far bigger. Um, what would happen is you're going to get that $10,000 in value no matter whether that company's stock goes up or down. And then when the time comes, they're going to give you the right amount of stock to hit that $10,000. So that's what I mean. The number of shares will adjust to meet the cash value granted. Um, it's taxed. The government sees that as a tax because if you just were given the shares, um, and then kind of the government didn't do anything about it, it would be a way around having your salary taxed, right? It'd be a way around income tax. So the government says you can't just hide from income taxes. When you get these RSUs, the government itself treats it like that was a cash bonus and says, all right, you now have triggered this tax, you owe the tax on those shares. So that means, and I've explained this in some other, I don't know, posts in the past and videos, that if you don't sell any of those shares, you've got to cough up the cash from somewhere in your own bank account to pay the taxes. The government just says, I don't care how you do it, but you owe these taxes for receiving these shares. And I'm going to treat it like it was a cash value, and so you owe the tax. So that's this, look in the parentheses on that third bullet. It means cash out of pocket unless shares are sold to cover the tax. So what you see very frequently, almost every time with these guys, is there's some portion. Thankfully with Adam last time, it was a pretty small portion. He kept most of his shares last year. So this year, in January, is when it kind of tends to happen for these guys. He sold a very small portion. If you recall, he didn't sell any APE. He only sold a little bit of AMC. I have a whole video about his shares if you want to go find that. I walked through it in great detail. And you just sell that to cover the taxes, and then you keep the rest. And that way there's nothing out of pocket. Again, just think about, like, see through it almost. Just see through it as the amount he kept was, in a way, what he was given. Why should he have to pay out of pocket to get these when it's part of his compensation? Okay, so that's kind of how RSUs work. RSOs are a little bit different. Rather than, with RSUs, it's like you're going to get this cash value no matter what. With RSOs, it's you're going to get a certain amount of shares no matter what. And if the stock goes up, you stand to make a lot of money because what happens is they lock the price in, usually at the time of the grant. And that's how it was at my company. And I happened to work at a company that the stock was going up year after year, so I was taking RSOs instead of RSUs. But note here, let's look at this second sentence under here. Should the value of the shares go up, these can become very valuable. So that worked out for me. But if shares don't appreciate, these can be a gamble. So what can happen is, and obviously we're in a little rockier economy right now. If you have RSOs, you get this locked-in price. It's like it's an option, it's a stock grant. You're going to get, let's say, these 1,000 shares, and they're at today's price here in, what's this, September, what are we, 16th or something. Sorry, guys, I just get so busy sometimes I don't even remember what day it is. September 16th. All right, so let's say they locked in the price as of yesterday, Friday the 15th, and they say, all right, over the next few years, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but over these next few years, you're going to get a percentage of these that you have access to until you have all of them. And let's say I just sit on those for like 4 years, and now the stock price is 4 years of growth on it, but I get it at that locked price from, 4 years ago. I can make a lot of money on those. But I'll tell you right now, too, and we're going to talk in a little bit about how every time I exercise those, I exercise them for cash. In other words, all those shares got sold right away. And I was at a company that was extremely strong, doing very well. You would want to own this stock. And I never kept the shares. I would exercise and sell them immediately, all as one transaction for the cash. Keep that in mind when people kind of look at these guys and what they're doing with their stock option grants and try to troll you with, oh, insider selling or whatever. This is an executive is just thinking this is part of my compensation package. This is money I'm getting paid and I want the money. You can keep the shares, but now you get into all kinds of tax things and then you also get into some risk. I'm going to talk about it in a minute. All right, so don't worry too much about RSOs because AMC so far I've never seen those. I've only seen RSUs over all these 3 years I've been here. Okay, so now let's talk about the third bullet here called vesting. If you don't know what vesting is, it just means, let's say Adam gets a new stock option grant this January, and the board says, all right, in each year, if you hit certain performance targets, we talked about that, right? Then you're going to get these shares, and you don't get to own them all right away. We want you to stick around. That's, by the way, one of the things with stock option grants. And remember, I talked about, in fact, let's go back, that first thing, talent retention, keeping your management. Stock options are often a way for a company to get their hooks into you and try to keep you. Because if you haven't vested, vesting is like each year a certain percent of those become yours. You don't own them all right away. With AMC, I've noticed it takes 3 years. At the company I worked at, it was 4 years. So these guys are getting basically a third of their grants each year, and they have to stay around at least 3 years for each grant. And so these are all vesting. So like last year's grant, when we hit January, Adam's going to get like a third of that. And then the next year he'll get a third, and then the next year. So he wouldn't even get all of last year's grant unless he sticks around until 2025. That's kind of how those work. So that's vesting. You just get a percentage of the shares every year from that grant. And so just think of this big ladder of a bunch of grants that are all vesting each time. And then incentive plans, I guess I've already talked about that. So a board can tie some of these grants to performance targets, and we've already talked about that. Now, I want to talk to you about kind of prevailing wisdom out there. If you were to go talk to a financial advisor, like how many times do you hear all of us apes say, not financial advice, but there are real financial advisors, right? And there are books on this, there's internet research on this, and there's actual financial advisors you can talk to. What they will tell you, there's just a general, let's call it a rule of thumb or prevailing wisdom, that the company you work for, your salary is already tied to that. So your ability to pay your house bills, pay your car bills, put food on the table, pay for your insurance, pay for all your streaming services, your travel, your life is probably dependent on the salary you're receiving from that company. That's already a lot of financial risk for you. Then what's more, you're probably getting health care, especially if you're an executive or you're just generally working at a larger company, you're getting health care coverage. So now your income is tied to that company and your access to health care is tied to that company. That is a lot of financial risk. And so in a post-Enron world, the prevailing wisdom is basically don't hold stock in a company you work for. I know that might sound crazy because you maybe want to believe in the company you're working for. For me, what I did is I just never let it become more than 10% of my overall portfolio. And guys, I was completely unemotional and black and white with that. Every single time my stock hit more than 10% of my portfolio, I sold enough to get back down. I never let it get above that. Some people would even say you should be at zero. I just worked at a really good company that the stock was going up year after year after year, and so I didn't want to just not own any. That was really to do with actually the way the company matched money that I put into my 401k. Whole other story for another day, but they matched it with company stock, and I allowed myself to keep some of that, but only ever 10% or below. And I was working for an amazing company that if I told you who they are, you'd be like, yeah, anybody would want to own that stock. And even I was not allowing myself to own stock more than 10% of my portfolio in that great company. It's just black and white wisdom for anybody. So you're going to see these guys, some of them are selling off when they get their grants. I'm just here to tell you, financial advisors, the internet, books are all saying that's what they should do. So I just hope you really start to understand the thinking that goes into this for some people, and that in some cases it's unemotional. They might love AMC. They do. I mean, look at how they've stayed and worked through a really hard period for the last few years. Do you guys understand the level of commitment it would take and how many nights these guys probably worked very late into the night trying to solve some real hard problems? Probably eating all kinds of takeout food for weeks on end, staying in the office. I've been there. I've worked some hard jobs where I worked crazy hours, and I'm telling you, there's moments where you're like, why am I doing this to myself? And they're, you know, the pandemic started in 2020. We're getting close to 4 years ago. These guys have stuck around. I haven't seen any real big senior executives leave. So just kind of understand the world they've been living in. I'm not asking you to love it. I understand there are points of view, even I have some points of view about inequities in the world and how this ape movement is about, pushing some real positive change in the world. But nonetheless, there's the way I want the world to work and there's the way the world does work. And if I'm going to affect change, I can't pretend, you know, that the world doesn't work certain ways. And I don't want to judge people for making decisions that generally all wise counselors would tell them they're supposed to make. So just please understand all of that. And so that's going to we're going to talk through more about RSUs and RSOs and how many shares do these guys actually own. It's all out there, sourced. You can get sourced documentation on all of that. So just wanted you to understand that a little bit. So in summary for this part one, we're kind of already there, guys. The board manages the CEO and sets compensation policies and determines governance as directed by law as well, right? The law sets the governance, then the board under the law sets the governance, then the CEO under the board runs the company. And that's the second bullet. The CEO runs the company within governance guardrails. Talked about those guardrails. The shareholders, now we're on us. We vote on the board and on any larger items that either, there's cases where the board has not had to ask for our vote. I hope you guys know that, and came to us anyway as good faith to let us vote on some things. There are some things they've done the past couple of years that did not require a vote. Now I'm back to that governance. The governance details when we're supposed to vote and when we don't have to vote. I can tell you by looking at the governance docs, there are several things that have happened the last few years that they gave us a vote on to kind of keep our engagement that they did not have to have us vote on. I think that tells me a little bit of something about how this company is running itself. So that's why I say the shareholders vote on the board itself, who's on the board, and on any larger items either volunteered for a vote, just talked about that, or required to vote by governance. Okay, so that just lets all know the roles of each of these. So now as we go into the vote, we're going to understand sort of the context of things that we're voting on. So future parts before this vote, I'll cover the document itself. I'm going to go through the source. I'm going to ask you to kind of look at the source document yourself. No need to just listen to influencers tell you what it says. Why don't we actually see what it says? Now, I understand some of these documents have legalese and corporateese, and I'm going to try to be a translator for anybody who decides they want to listen to me. But I still encourage you, to the extent you're able, take a look at the source document itself. So we'll go pull that. I will go through it, and that's why I don't know what I'm even voting yet. Like, I want to spend time looking at that and absorbing it before I have an opinion. I'm not just letting influencers tell me how to vote. We'll do an outlook on the company itself. I think that matters because, our vote impacts the company and the company impacts our vote. There's a little bit of a circle there that it's all related. And then I'm going to kind of just be thinking about the balance of trust and advocacy. So in this vote, so now I'm just telling you me. As I go into the vote, I'm thinking, okay, I've talked about I want change in the world, so I'm an advocate. I'm pushing for things that I want to see in the world, whether through AMC, our fight against Wall Street, other parts of the, financial, social, whatever part of the world you want to talk about. Okay, so that's being an advocate for what I believe is positive change and us banding together as apes, right? On the other side of that scale, you can't see me, but I'm holding my hands out kind of like a scale, is this a group of executives and this board that has earned any trust from me? And so there's a balance, right? If I always blindly trust, I can be manipulated and conned, and I can miss some things. So I don't just want to go that way. But if I'm always poking and prodding and agitating, I don't have a good relationship with this company. And so the question is, and that goes both ways, right? Like if the company doesn't act trustworthy, then it doesn't have a good relationship with me. And if I don't trust at all, I don't have a good relationship with it. And I think we win. This is personal opinion. I think AMC wins if apes and this company are also united. And so far, that's what I've seen, and that's why I'm still here. But I do see voices who are constantly negative and constantly poking and constantly agitating. There's just no level of trust there. For some, that's because they've come from a hard place in life, let's say, and they've kind of they feel they've learned not to trust. I can respect that. I can understand that. For others, it's because I think they have an agenda that I will fight against. If someone's coming with a negative agenda, I'm going to personally push back. That's where I am, because that's what I'm about, is positivity. And so my point of view is I'm going to find that balance where I don't give up my voice, I don't give up my advocacy, but I also assess where can I trust people who have a track record they've shown me I can trust. And I just want to kind of, as you go into the vote, ask you to think about sort of, this is kind of from Survivor. My wife and I have been binging through all of the seasons. We're still way behind the current season, but after the kids go to bed, some nights we watch a couple episodes, and so we've been kind of plowing through all the seasons. And there's this idea, right? Like, I've noticed we're on season 22. There's some real themes that develop through the seasons where you can see the teams who decide they're going to cooperate and work together. And even though they know at some point the way the game of Survivor works, people are going to backstab and blindside and figure out ways to get someone else out so I can benefit myself. That's part of the game, right? But in general, in the first few weeks, I've noticed that in general, the teams that can trust each other tend to start winning. And interestingly, it's this irony, right? Like, the teams that don't trust each other sometimes lose these team challenges and now have to vote someone else, which then makes them trust each other even less, and it feeds on this negative cycle. On the other side, there can be a virtuous cycle where we trust each other, and because of our mutual trust, we work better together and we accomplish more, and because we're winning, we've built even more trust. And so I just want to ask you to kind of think about, again, I just talked about balance, the balance between paranoia and trust. And that is hard these days, right? Like, we are fighting corrupt powers, infiltrators, manipulators. Sometimes you don't know who to trust. Sometimes I don't know who to trust. I look at a lot of people sideways in this movement because of times that I've been burned. I bet you've had some of that too. And so there's balance. I'm not asking for blind trust. I'm not asking for giving up your voice. But I am asking to think about the times where it's going to be more effective for either us as apes or even apes with AMC to work together rather than having to fight each other and having paranoia rule the day. So that's just a concept. You decide for yourself what that means. I'm going to decide for myself what that means. Meanwhile, I ask, I talked in the last video, I've talked before, if Adam has delivered this scoreboard, and I'll just go through these, I don't have the animation today, but Q2 profits on half the movies from pre-COVID. Half the movies, and yet they delivered profits. That tells me this is a group who's managed their expenses, trimmed the fat, leaned out to the point where now they're profitable with even a lower product line. What happens when more movies come back? That's a good management team. That earns my trust. We have lower debt now, I'm at the bottom left, than pre-COVID. This management team has been wisely using resources to balance avoiding risk, right? They've avoided bankruptcy. Sometimes they've had to hold on to cash for that. And good, sound balance sheet management. They've been paying down debt. Okay, that earns my trust. That's some things they've been doing. They've created from nothing a distribution company. Like, they were not a distributor before. Now they're a distributor and going to make money from their own competitors. All right, that starts to earn my trust. You're doing good things, so I expect more good things from you. That's trust right there. They're implementing the candy business. We are owners in a gold and silver mine. I happen to be very pleased with that. The popcorn business, no pun intended, exploded and is going further. That builds trust. If someone has a track record of success and is running my company as a shareholder, I go, okay, actually, you know what? I think I want you to keep running my company. You've done well in the past. I look at all these milestones in the past. Why would I suddenly expect you're not going to keep doing well? And then, just Taylor Swift, that speaks for itself. So I look at this management company, combination of the board and the executives, and I say they steered through the worst financial crisis possibly in the history of man. They had zero revenue for months, almost a year. Zero revenue, not just like low revenue, zero. And they managed to go through it while their competitors went bankrupt. They did not. So they stood out as leaders in the industry. Now they're doing things that no one else in the industry is doing, like popcorn and concerts and distribution and hitting profits on half the business and candy. And I didn't even put wine on here. Looks to me like a management group that's doing a good job. And I speak to you as someone who comes out of the corporate world and who has two masters in business. It doesn't mean I'm right, but I think I've earned a right to have a point of view. That's all I mean. You can disagree with me, but I think my point of view is informed at the least. Even if I'm wrong, at least I'm informed. That's, I suppose, why I say it that way. So this is a management group that I do trust. I know some of you don't, and that's okay. I'm not demanding that we agree on that, but I'm telling you, if you're watching this channel, you're watching someone who looks at the track record of performance and says, I want them to keep leading. That doesn't mean I'll be a yes necessarily on everything on the vote. I'm going to read the document as I said. I'm going to assess how I feel about all of that. Like I said, I don't give up my voice. I hold the right to decide what I'm going to vote. I hope you do too. But as I go in, I'm going to think about, you know, let's go there. What's the role of the board? What's the role of the CEO? What's my role as shareholder? And how have they been leading? Okay? So for me, I look at this scoreboard and I go, let's go.